working to get plans together for the National Citizens Assembly. That's right. So just a little bit about myself. I'm a Cambridge resident. And I got interested in sortition and Citizens Assemblies a while ago. I stood for MP in Cambridge twice on a ticket based on a kind of Citizens Assembly sortition type thing. Didn't get elected. And I think I know John from because we were trying to start something called the G1000, where the aim is to get 1,000 randomly selected people together, a place like this, and spend a day together, meeting each other and coming up with project ideas about your local community. But we never got funding for that. So, onwards. Okay, I was going to have a presentation, but it doesn't matter because I didn't write it. So I'll just talk a bit. So I'm just going to do a very quick talk about Citizens Assemblies and how they relate to Extinction Rebellion, why we're asking for one. I'm going to talk briefly about the Greater Cambridge Partnership one, and then questions. So I might talk fairly quickly. Stop me if I'm talking too quickly. I'm not great at this. But probably best if you save your questions to the end. Okay. Unless it's a pressing one. So what is the Citizens Assembly? So the general idea of Citizens Assembly is that you get a group of people together, randomly selected. They come together and they learn about critical thinking, and they get bias training. They get some experts who talk to them about the subject matter, and then they sit down, they deliberate using facilitators to assist this, and then they make decisions based on the subject matter. So that's the nub of it. So they're randomly selected, but not in general. They're selected according to a sample, not sample. The people are selected according to a process called stratification, where we try and get a population, what we call a mini public. So it matches the populace that are going to be affected by the decision. So in the case of the national one, the aim would be to get people in the general proportions that are representative of the entire country. Some of you may have heard of something called People's Assemblies. So I think XR pushed that, they're pushing that as well. Really unfortunate name. So we tried to get it changed, but the manuals have been printed, so end of that. The difference is, so Citizens Assembly, people are randomly selected. So it's not very much the same kind of people turning up all the time. And it's generally longer term. So it's over multiple weekends. You're thinking about the subject a lot more, etc. People's Assembly, self-selected. So we ran some in Parliament Square, etc. People just turning up. And then it's a similar kind of thing, group deliberation, which is why XR like it. So getting away from this argumentative style. In general, People's Assemblies run for about an hour to 4 hours. And generally to get the feel of, gets a few decisions out of a group rather than make decisions based on evidence, although People's Assemblies can have evidence put to them. So why are XR using them? Or why are XR pushing for Citizens Assemblies? I got interested in XR because of Citizens Assemblies, although most people, it's interesting to find that most people who in the Citizens Assembly field, the academics, I'm not an academic, they're interested in the climate change aspect of this, and the fact that we've failed to deal with the large-scale problems. So that's why XR are interested. It's because it's a method of getting past the current political system that can't deal with long-term issues, because as soon as you start putting in the measures to deal with that long-term issue, you're going to get voted out because they are going to be unpopular. Even if you can see that they will be, it's that standard thing, you will see it will be popular in the long term, but not in the short space where you have to get re-elected. And so our current political system, where you're electing people once every 5 years, or every 2 years currently, just doesn't represent. We have nuanced questions we need to ask about different things and listen to evidence about it. And the current political system just doesn't work at all for that. We can see how now everything is just focused on one issue, which is Brexit, and we're not paying any attention to any of the other issues that, well, it's basically going to end life on this planet. There's other things, so we have opinion polls, and so this kind of vox pop thing as you get on the BBC as well. Very unconsidered, uninformed vote, so people just go and say what they think. It's that instant thing of, I think this about this. Whereas in a Citizens Assembly, people sit down, they talk to each other, they listen to each other, and it's quite interesting that almost all Citizens Assemblies are done face to face. So you basically bring people in together, and they sit down, and they talk to each other, and you get a lot of empathy with other people. People listen to each other, they actually change their views, listen to the evidence. And this actually happened. So there's a lovely film by a chap called Patrick Chalmers about the Irish Citizens Assembly. Just people saying about how they didn't actually change their mind, but they now understood a lot more about how other people felt on the other side of the argument. Because, of course, you've got a very polarised argument there. I'll talk more about that in a second. And politicians, so in the case of the Irish Citizens Assemblies, they can't deal with those controversial subjects because they instantly get voted out one way or the other. Also, current parties have vested interests, so politicians have vested interests. I think we're quite lucky in Cambridge. We had people like Julian Hubbard, and I actually don't know that much about Daniel, but people who were quite, as I could see, almost honest about it. But if you look at the broad scale of the MPs we have quite a lot of them own large amounts of property, so they're not going to go against their own vested interests. They're not just going to do it selflessly, etc. So, and they also, a lot of them are career politicians, so they have to maintain voting for their party if they want to stay in their party. So Citizens Assemblies, I've got a list of terms. They're fair, they're inclusive. So even if you're not in the room, someone like you who is representative of you will be in the room. A key thing is they're transparent. So, well, they can be made to be transparent so that people know what evidence has gone in and the decisions that come out. Currently, we get a decision about something and we don't know what evidence has been made to do that, what lobby groups have pushed, etc. Informed, evidence-based decisions, they're deliberative, and people tend to trust them once they've been through a Citizens Assembly process. They trust the outcome, and so the more people go through them, and if everybody had been through one, they would then trust the general outcomes of how they work. It's quite key that the people in the Citizens Assemblies are able to question what's happening to them. So they can put their hand up and go, I'm sorry, we haven't had any evidence from big oil companies. Greenpeace has just been talking about us for like 2 days. We haven't had anybody else. And so they're able to affect the process themselves and saying, there's also oversight bodies as well. And Citizens Assemblies, they can think long-term. They can look at these long-term things because they're not trying to get re-elected, etc. All the points are made about bad politicians. The opposite is true of citizens who are selected randomly. They may have vested interest, so one person may have a vested interest, but as a group, they don't. And so a nice phrase is that instead of getting public opinion, we get public judgment. And there's a map of a whole load of them. So they've happened all over the world. We've just had some in the UK of one about social care. There was one on Brexit. And of course we've had the long-running one in Ireland that dealt with, I think, 5 different issues. Where's this one? So 5 issues over 1.5 years, 99 citizens randomly selected and 1 supreme judge. It's a slightly different method they ran over there. And so out of that came the referendum and they legalised gay marriage, and they got rid of the eighth. Yeah. And so quite interestingly, just some statistics. So they ran one on climate change. So I think that's just come out, the report. But coming out of the Citizens Assembly, so these are randomly selected from all over. They sat down, they talked about climate change, they listened to everything. 99% agreed that there should be selling renewable power back to the grid. 97% agreed they should end peat extraction. It's those kind of numbers. When you sit down, they listen, and they're not sitting there. There might have been someone who was a peat farmer, but when they sit down and listen, general massive agreement because they listen to the evidence. And this is quite an issue, which is why I just got fed up with party politics. You could spend your entire life digging up ice cores saying, look, the climate's changing, or, it's the end of everything, and then a politician just dismisses it. There's no actual listening to that evidence, whereas here it feels like the people themselves are listening, and then they're governing themselves. So why does XR need one? So here's a picture of the climate debate and the House of Parliament. 40 people. I think XR's put that a bit more on the map. And they just don't represent us. So it's, the people in Parliament are not representative of us at the moment. So XR is lobbying for an evidence-based democratic solution. Okay. So we've just been planning. We had a 2-day meeting recently. We got experts from all over the place in Citizens Assemblies. We spent 2 days in London, and we figured out that generally we'd have a Citizens Assembly there would be an initial assembly that would set the agendas, so to look at which sectors the next set of assemblies are going to look at, and then those further set of Citizens Assemblies would look at individual things like transport, agriculture, etc. And then have some, which we haven't worked out yet, there needs to be a method of them crossing over, because of course you can't look at one thing in isolation without the other, but you still need to break the problem down. So the size, we're looking at about 300 to 600 people being selected, and this will be over 10 weekends. The entire process probably taking about 30 to 40 weeks if we did it the fastest possible, because you've got to tender, get experts, get stakeholders together, etc. And it would cost several million. So there are concerns. People say it's too expensive, but then the House of Lords costs 19 million a year to run. So, and also climate change will cost everything. So, people are worried that it's going to come up with the wrong decision. So I think we just have to have trust in our fellow human being that when presented with the evidence, they will make reasonable decisions. And currently we put all our faith in politicians who have vested interests in everything I've mentioned before. And if we look at the current system, what we currently trust in, it's brought us to the edge of extinction. So I'm happy to go with something else. Okay. Citizens Assembly Working Group, that's us. So very quickly, so that's the XR stuff, Citizens Assemblies, and we can get to questions about that in a second. Who knows about the GCP, Greater Cambridge Partnership? Obviously no. So a while ago, we approached the GCP and said, so they've got, I think, something like $500 million. So we had a group, we were sitting there talking about sortition and Citizens Assemblies. And the GCP were going out there pushing out surveys and consultations, and everybody's saying everything they do is awful. And so we went to the CEO and said, you need a Citizens Assembly. We put together a proposal, and then as we'd finished the proposal, the government decided to actually push 8 Citizens Assemblies pilots out. There was a woman called Miriam had been around the world. She'd gone to see Citizens Assemblies in Australia, where they are massive. They do them all the time. They did one on nuclear waste. It was great. And she came back and got funding for 8 of them. And so we managed to get GCP to get a submission in. And then it all went quiet. Everything went really political. And then he dropped it from 8 to 3. But then Cambridge got one. So Cambridge are now going to have a Citizens Assembly on, I think it's transport. What's the exact question?
Not sure.
It's like transport in the city centre. Then I think something like 10,000 invites will go out, and then we'll do random sampling on those, and hopefully we'll see some good decisions. And it may not be, it's going to be a stepping stone to saying Citizens Assemblies work, and everybody seeing it and reporting it. So happy to talk about that as well. That's me. Sorry if I gabble a bit, and also I was hoping the projector, but it's okay. So has anybody got any questions? Shall I just start here and go round, is that right?
How do we make them legally binding in the long term? Like, what would be to stop a... Sorry. How do we make them legally binding in the long term, and what's to stop a future government coming in and saying, actually, we've decided that now that decision is going to be overturned?
So that's a good question. So in Poland, they actually get, so there's a chap called Marcin, he does this a lot, and he talks to the mayors, and the mayors actually agree that they're going to take everything on board if it gets to a 90% vote from the people inside the Citizens Assemblies. With the National Citizens Assembly, we're looking for Extinction Rebellion. There's no way we could put it into law because we just don't have time, and we don't think we could get that mandate. The key thing is there we have got Extinction Rebellion behind us. So the point is the Citizens Assembly, which is completely separate from Extinction Rebellion for obvious reasons, because it needs to be seen to be separate, they get the government to agree to holding the Citizens Assembly, because it actually be the government who tender for it and fund it, and then to say they're going to listen to the outcome, and then there's a scrutiny panel from randomly selected citizens who watch what the government doing afterwards, and if they don't follow it, our only recourse is to get back on the streets again. So in future, I would like to see it legally binding. I would like to see the entire government run by this. That's a personal view there. But XR are interested to change in the democratic system as well. But for the national one, there is no way we could do it. We just basically have to say it's getting them to that position, and then they keep on it. Until it's actually part of how things run, you can't stop the system fixing afterwards.
In, for instance, an island in Australia, it's what, legally binding for 10? In Australia, Ireland, is it legally binding for what, 10 years, 20 years, 100 years?
In Ireland, they changed the constitution. The referendum was there too.
Everyone speak a bit louder,
Okay,
please.
sorry. Oh, sorry. So in Ireland, it was the referendum were held because in Ireland you have to have a referendum to change the constitution. So that is now part of it. So if they wanted to change it back, they would have to have another referendum to change it back.
Okay.
So
in the UK, if we wanted to make this legally binding forever, we would have to have a referendum on the decision of the Citizens Assembly to make it law. It's change the constitution or create a constitution.
No, because we'd have to have we don't have a constitution
in the first place.
Yes, so
okay.
I think you have to put it into law, but then of course, unless you change your political system, they could change it later on. Okay. So you need to keep the pressure up.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
When you say that Extinction Rebellion couldn't run the Citizens Assembly, the national one, because obviously they'd be prejudicial. Who does run it then, and how's that decided?
So we have long arguments about this. So probably has to go through a government tendering process because it's going to cost several million. What we've said is that there's various people who could run it who are backed by big oil, and so just happens to be. So we would kind of veto those. but then it would be up to, and it would probably have to be most of the companies who do this kind of thing helping run this. So there are companies, there's a company called Involve, My Society now do it, RSA do it. These sort of companies are out there and they're doing it. So they're happening already. But it would just be a tendering process to get these people in. There is an oversight body created that has random selection of people, possibly also politicians and other stakeholders and NGOs, who are just at the side, just looking at the whole process, including the tendering, just to say, hang on a second, that's not working correctly, that's not how that should work. So there is an oversight process as well to this. Okay.
Sorry, could you explain who Greater Cambridge Partnership are?
So they're a combined group of, I think it's 3 different councils, and they're a separate body who are improving transport, or they're tasked with improving transport within Cambridge, but with a very specific mandate about increasing growth or something. So,
something to do with the council?
The councils, yes.
Thanks.
And interestingly enough, for the Innovation and Democracy Fund, the council leader had to sign off. So Lewis Herbert, he's quite gung-ho for all this because he was at the G1000 thing and everything. He could sign off, but then also the other councils all signed off as well. So we got 3 councils.
What does signed off?
Oh, signed off in that they agreed to the Citizens Assembly, and they agreed to listen to the outcome of the Citizens Assembly. So, and at least to implement most of the recommendations and to say why they weren't going to implement the others. That was the kind of wording to get the fundings for these.
How will the thousands of people who are invited to take part in the Greater Cambridge Partnership Citizens Assembly be chosen?
So I believe it will be done using the postcode database, and then a random selection of those people will be chosen, vastly more than are required. So I think we put in for 100, but it might be 50. So probably, I would have thought 5,000 to 10,000 invites go out. Then people, they get the invite by post, and then they can either go online or phone up, and then we ask them questions about socioeconomic background, gender, etc. And then that all comes back, and then a random selection of those are taken. So we're looking for a certain number of different genders, different races, etc., and different breakdowns. Also geographical, very important for the GCP one. Of course, you want people outside the centre of Cambridge, because they need to go about. And so then those are chosen as selected. So it is something that essentially they volunteer for, but lots of people volunteer for, and then those are chosen. They're also paid to increase their likelihood that they're going to attend, because otherwise you only get people who can afford to come. Ooh. Yeah.
Can you speak loudly so we can really hear you? If you're paying people, doesn't that stop people who are in receipt of benefits from participating?
I don't know is the answer. Interesting question, I've not had that before.
Probably yes.
Yeah.
I imagine it would be done on something like if you're called up for jury duty, if you're in receipt of benefits or disability benefits and asked to do jury duty, that doesn't count as paid work or anything. You still get your benefits. And there would be a limited amount, up to a certain limit of money that would be reimbursed to people for missing time at work.
That's interesting. I will look into that. So, thank you.
How many people usually take part in a Citizens Assembly? Is it like this size group or 100? Or?
So depends. So we've done ones in Scotland. So I'm also part of something called the Sortition Foundation, and we do the sortition services for things like this. In general, we just promote sortition and citizens' assemblies. So we've done the sortition for ones in Scotland where they've done like 20 people. Just done one in Wales, which is 60 people, where we sent out 10,000 invites. So they're normally that kind of size. So you're normally talking 50 to probably 150, 160 is probably the biggest they've done.
In a discussion group?
Yes, so you're not sitting down like this, so you'll be sitting down, sorry, I've done this terribly explained. So normally it'd be like groups of 4 or 8, where you're sitting down with facilitators, and you're changing all the time, and you'll listen to evidence, and you'll go away, listen to evidence, and come back and deliberate about it. See, it's not, you wouldn't be sitting like this, because this is it's a very clumsy way of getting, it's a good way of me telling you things, but for all of you to communicate, it'd end up like the leader debate last night.
So you just said that you might send out, sorry, the first thing is Sortition organising this one for the GCP? Is it, have I understood that?
No.
Okay.
So they did a tendering process, and they chose Involve My Society and the RSA as a combined thing.
They chose who?
Involve My Society. They used to run things. I used to work for them actually. They're a Democrat.
RSA.
And the RSA.org. Yeah. So
you mentioned that you'd send out 10,000 invites, and you got 60 people who accepted.
No. So you send out 10,000 invites, and you get a lot of people back in.
And then you choose. Okay.
And then you choose that. So it's random, and then you stratify. So you put them into their little buckets. So say you're this type, this type, this type, and then you're on normally like 3 or 4 different categories. And then from then you randomly choose from those.
And you also said something about 10 weekends. And I
For
just wonder how many people would be able to, I mean, it ceases to become a random sample when you select people who can do that.
So the 10 weekends is for the national one. That's what we're talking about. For the Greater Cambridge Partnership, I think it might be 3 weekends. But also there will be support provided to ensure that, say for example, people who need to provide, who are carers or need care, or who need transport, etc., that everything is provided for them. So you need to make sure that everybody who wants to attend is able to attend. What's the other point? I can't remember. Sorry. Is that everything?
I think so. I just think that it's hopefully a reasonably balanced sample, but it seems like the people who will want to do it won't be a balanced set of population.
So the aim is, so if you're doing something like a national assembly that's going to affect every single part of life in Britain, you advertise about it beforehand. You say, this is what is going to happen. Do you want to have a part in this? And people, from all walks of life joined the Irish one and stayed there for, what was it, a year and a half. They had very low dropout, because if people are going to get listened to, there's a sense of agency and you're part of something. It's not just coming along for a consultation, ticking some boxes for a year. It's actually part of something. So once they all got there was very low drop-off. And if you provide adequate support for them to come and make these decisions and spend that time, then I think you've got a good model. Yes, it does bias itself slightly to people who initially think they can only give up this time, but if you help get them past that, then I think you can.
But you give support, that's great. I mean, you do give support, adequate support.
And sometimes you have to, in some places they'll do, depending on the Citizens Assembly, you'll do outreach. So people who aren't on the postcode database, essentially. So you've got homeless people, or maybe people who are in prison, etc. Also, there's an issue, especially for the climate change one, do you choose people who are under 18?
Yeah.
So I think that's quite key.